Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Monica Ortiz Uribe. On today's show, we're going to focus our attention south of the border in Ciudad Juárez. The intense drug violence that happened there is still fresh on the minds of many people who live in this region, though some people have not returned to Juárez since then. My two guests co-authored a book that focuses on a group of people who spoke out during that violence and the impact that they made in that city. So today I'd like to welcome Dr. Kathleen Staudt and Dr. Zulma Méndez. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So why don't we start off by tell me, you're both professors,
Yes.
where you teach and what you teach and what your relationship with Juárez has been.
Okay, well, I arrived at UTEP in 1977. I teach courses in the political science department. I teach women power and politics, border politics, democracy, public policy analysis, and qualitative methods.
And when did you start working in Ciudad Juárez?
I started that work actually in the 1990s because I had a team of people working on informal economies at the U.S.-Mexico border that resulted in a book called Free Trade, ? Informal Economies at the U.S.-Mexico border, because the informal workers are the true free traders. And then after that, I had a colleague, Susan Ripberger, and she and I wrote a book about public schools on both sides of the border called Pledging Allegiance, Learning Nationalism in El Paso and Juárez. And Dr. Iracema Coronado and I also wrote a book called Fronteras No Más, Towards Social Justice at the U.S.-Mexico border, about cross-border organizing. But specifically on this topic about violence against women, it was around 2002 that there was a transnational solidarity developing over the horrendous violence against women taking place.
So quite some time, at least
Yes.
two decades. Okay, and Zulma, tell us about you.
Well, I'm a professor at El Colegio de Chihuahua in Ciudad Juárez. I teach methods of qualitative research, and I am originally from Juárez. I've lived in Juárez almost all my life, except when I went away to get my doctorate degree. I've been an activist for almost 20 years with different organizations in the city of Ciudad Juárez. And my previous research prior to this publication, this book that Kathy and I put together, was on the question of educational systems and educational reform in Ciudad Juárez. And so witnessing the violence and the activism that people engaged in the city, I was inspired to begin to write about the story of this activism.
So your book is called Courage, Resistance, and Women in Ciudad Juárez, Challenges to Militarization. It's a fierce title.
Yes, it is.
Tell me about what inspired the book and what it's about.
Well, I think I'm going to let Zulma talk about that because she was and is the activist who was very involved in a type of participant observation in important organizations that began to courageously resist and alter the narratives that the government was trying to impose upon people in the city.
Well, the book is mostly an attempt to document how different figures, but in particular we focus on a number of women in the city of Ciudad Juárez, were able to transform the ways in which people thought about the city and also thought about or made sense of what was going on at the time. The book is an attempt to intervene in this narrative that had been pervasive at the time and that continues to be pervasive in the city of Ciudad Juárez, about a place that is violent, a place that is chaotic, And so in this sense, what we are able to capture in the pages of this book is how these women struggle and how in their demand for justice, people began to rethink the ways in which they saw militarization and its targets. And so, this was mainly the voices of women making this transformation, calling attention to other aspects of the city, like the resistance and the organizing that took place at very grassroots level that had not been focused or had not been paid attention to previously.
So what is this alternative narrative? What is the message that these women were trying to get across?
Well, I mean, for instance, in the case of Luz Maria Davila, which we retell the story of what happened there when, after the Villas de Salvarcar massacre, she's a mother of 2 kids that were killed.
She's a mother of 2 kids who lives in Ciudad Juárez.
Yes, that were killed in the Villas de Salvarcar massacre in Ciudad Juárez in 2010, early January 2010. She's able to show.
What happened there for those of us that don't know what happened that day?
Yeah, there's a number of students, mostly adolescents, that are having a birthday party in this working class neighborhood, and this command of, or this group of gunmen come and shoot at them and kill around 15 of them. And so the following week, the president, or the following week, the president makes a pronouncement from Japan where he's doing a state visit, and he tells people that yes, these kids have been killed, but that they are involved in drugs, and that in fact they might be gangsters. So this really creates uproar in the city because of these very reckless statement by the president. And so
because these kids were students, they were and athletes in town. They were celebrating a birthday party.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that people begin to mobilize in the city. The president arrives 15 days later. And he's there to launch the Todos Somos Juárez initiative, which is the program that would aim to restore the social fabric that people deemed at that moment has been broken. And Luz Maria Davila, the mother of these 2 kids, 2 adolescents, one a college student, the other one a high school student.
They were at this party. They were killed at this party.
That were killed, who were killed there, is able to sneak in this event where the president is going to launch and make the announcement on Todos Somos Juárez. And she tells the president that she cannot welcome him to the city, and that in fact she is disappointed about her kids being labeled and other people's kids being labeled as gangsters, that those are lies, that they were students, and that she wants him to do something about the situation that people in the city are happening, that it's not just about her kids, but it is about the situation in the city, and that she expects him to do something. And she's telling him, we have been denouncing the violence, and the mayor who was there, and she points to the mayor, and the governor have not done anything about it. And so that moment went viral.
I remember it. I remember that moment. I was a reporter covering that meeting when the president was there, and it was one of the most poignant moments in the drug war to see this humble mother of 2 kids standing right face to face to the president, basically, telling him, "You're not welcome here, and what if these were your kids, and how would you react?" So this is one of the women. This is one of the stories that's told in the book.
Yes, and people can find these videos on YouTube, and they have been watched by hundreds of thousands of people. That's what we mean by viral.
Right. I mean, the media played a very critical role in kind of making Luz Maria's message visible. And as a result of that, of people hearing her speak as a humble maquiladora worker who is confronting power in this very symbolically charged moment, that transforms the ways in which people see militarization. Because up to that day, people really there was spread public support, widely spread public support behind militarization. People felt that militarization could solve the issue.
Well, tell me, how was militarization even introduced, and what did it involve in Juarez?
Well, as many people probably realize, there was competition between organized criminals to control the space of Ciudad Juárez, which delivers drugs into the lucrative market of the United States, where there's such a high demand for drugs. And so since about 2007 or 2008, the murder rate began to skyrocket. And in early 2008, I believe it was March, the President Calderon sent in federal troops, and pictures that captured these jeeps and long processions of military vehicles coming in made a lot of people feel like this was an occupied territory. But there was a sense that, well, maybe the federal government knows what it's doing, and maybe there will finally be peace and security on an everyday basis in the city. Not only did the military come in, but also the federal police. And after a few years, because after all this confrontation between the mother of the two sons who were killed and the president took place several years later, after the troops came in, the murder rate just continued to climb. And people were beginning to doubt the federal government strategy, that everything was going to be okay, just wait, because it seemed as though perhaps the federal police and the military were also involved in killing people.
I remember that year. 2010 was the year that the violence peaked and that the murders peaked at over 3,000 people.
Yes, and it had been about 300 before all of this was taking place. So a tenfold increase.
So I recall also at the very beginning of the violence going to a protest that was hosted by doctors in town that were being the target of kidnappings. A few of them were killed, and they gathered at this downtown plaza where the big giant Mexican flag is flying, and they had their faces covered with surgical masks, and they didn't want to give their names when I interviewed them. And so it was clear that they were fearful about speaking out, but yet still they were speaking out. And I wonder what you made of that, and if that changed over the years, especially after the incident with Luz Maria Davila.
Well, the federal government and possibly state and municipal police were not only securing the city supposedly with their weapons, but they were also surveilling people in the city. They were taking pictures of activists. They were trying to intimidate activists. There were journalists who were murdered. There were activists who were also at risk, including Marisela Escovedo, whose story we also tell in great detail in the book. And so people were hopeful that their government might do something, but they also realized that the government was striking out against them if they dared to speak up in these courageous ways that we analyze in the book.
So this resistance movement was against the government strategy to help lower the government strategy to help lower the violence in Juarez. And what you're telling me is there was a group of citizens that said, no, this isn't the way to combat this violence. What was their proposal? What were they proposing as an alternative?
Well, they wanted justice.
Exactly. I mean, it wasn't that. It wasn't at the beginning that they were proposing, but they had suffered the violence that stemmed from the process of militarization, because activists and human rights groups had documented in the very first 2 years how the homicides and even the femicide rate had gone up in scandalous, numbers. And so what they were saying is, this strategy that you are implementing and that you promised would stop the violence, not only has it not stopped it, but it has exacerbated it. And so we want you to reconsider your strategy And in addition to that, we want you to provide us with access to a right to truth. We demand to know what happened to our family members that have been killed, because in this so-called drug war, people who have been killed, for the most part, are unarmed, and so how can this be a war where people who are the victims or who are dying in this so-called battleground are unarmed? A war has two sides, and here we don't see what the other side, the strategy is failing.
I mean, not only is there the doubts about the doubt about the federal government strategy, but this lack of justice, which we also talk in the book, that is reflected in statistics about impunity, police impunity, which has long been a cry in Juarez. Various studies show that most crimes go uninvestigated, most crimes are not prosecuted, but rather a declaration is made just right around the time that a body is found. Oh, they must have been involved in the drug war, and making it seem as though various government officials thought it was better that they were just dead anyway. And the rate of impunity is something like 97, 98%. It's
so
horrifying.
in a year, in the year of 2010, when there were 3,000 murders committed in town, with a 90% impunity, 90% or higher impunity rate, this means that of those 3,000 murders that happened in the city, there were no arrests, no convictions,
no investigations.
No investigation.
Luz Maria Davila, in the case of her two sons who were killed in Villas de Salvarcar, months had passed. She went to check to see how the investigations were going. The file had one single sheet, the folder. And so, I mean, that was just completely unacceptable.
This was in this birthday party massacre where 15 people were killed. She looks at the file, and there's one page in there.
But I wanted to elaborate a little on what Kathy had said, and just to respond also to your question. In this context of militarization that we witnessed in the city and that we had to endure in the city of Ciudad Juárez, one of the things that became evident and that human rights insisted on denouncing was the fact that social life was being criminalized. And so when that occurs, when social life is being criminalized, everyone is a suspect. And so life becomes very, very precarious. And victims become suspects of their own tragedy. And so what we see in the city is people who are being killed, labeled as gangsters. They're being labeled and they're being pointed at as though they are involved in something. They are suspect of something that we don't know what it is. But there are the suggestions that they're involved in cartel-related activities, but nothing is proven. And so this really damaged the ways in which people are able to build community in the city. Not only including in this criminalization of social life is also the criminalization of activism. And so that's when we see another case that we portray in this book, which is Marisela Escovedo being killed as an activist. I mean, first a victim, she lost her.
Well, let's talk about who is Marisela and what's her story.
Well, she's the mother of a daughter, Ruby, who was partnered with a very violent man. I guess we might call it a common law marriage. And he murdered Ruby, the daughter. He confessed to the murder. He dismembered the body, led the authorities to the dump where he put the dismembered parts. And for some strange reason, he went to trial, but they let him go. And so Marisela Escovedo, her son, others were trying to track this person down for enforcing laws about murder. And she went on approximately 2-year quest She and her sons knew where the perpetrator of the crime was, but the authorities never seemed to be able to identify him. Marisela was doing a lot of protests. She was calling attention to this tragedy, to the impunity, and she would even go to Chihuahua City and protest in front of the governor's palace. And so one evening, December 16th, I think, is the anniversary of her assassination. One evening, the streets around the governor's palace, which normally had a lot of guards and police officers and so on, seemed to have been cleared, and caught on video was an assassin who came out and shot her. And that's something that also went viral.
This is a security video, or how was this
It
captured?
was a security video by the governor's palace. And so she, a week before, had confronted the governor. There was a kind of resistance, a very impolite accusation. How is it we can find the perpetrator, but your authorities can't do it with all your resources? So a week after the insult, she was assassinated, and people speculate who could it have been. Was it actually government or government contracting with organized crime related to the perpetrator of the crime?
Was her murder also unresolved?
Well, I mean, there was an arrest. This person was arrested, but the family sustains, and to this day, that who they arrested is a scapegoat. There are witnesses who contend that it was someone related to Rubiz, the daughter of Marisela Escovedo, someone related to Rubi's in-laws. And so this case, Marisela Escovedo, also brought attention to the ways in which justice in the legal system in the state of Chihuahua were failing. And we're not protecting people who, like Marisela, who had already alerted authorities on death threats that she received, and that crimes were not being investigated, like the case of her daughter.
So the violence has been diminishing since then, and I wonder if what that says. Has there been any progress made in terms of how the judicial system functions in Chihuahua, in the state of Chihuahua, and the community's relationship with police? Has anything changed now that the violence has started to diminish?
There's no doubt that numbers have decreased. I mean, that's, you can see the numbers and they will speak for themselves. However, the numbers are still big. I mean, the numbers are still scandalous, and they should really call attention to, they should worry us.
I understand it's about when in the height of the violence, it was averaging about 8 murders a day, and now it's about 1 murder a day.
Correct.
Which is still higher than about high.
Something else happened, and that is some of the organized criminal violence transferred from the central borderlands to the northeast of Mexico and the South Texas border. And so there are other external factors that help to explain things. Mexico's Congress passed a law insisting that all the states, mandating all the states to engage in reform in the criminal justice system. And I think the law was passed in 2008, and they have until 2016 to finalize the reform, although we couldn't identify resources that might help states to actually engage in reform. So in the US, we would call this an unfunded mandate, I suppose. Now, interestingly, Chihuahua has been labeled as a state that has made some of the best refors. Yet still we see, we see these things. So a lot activists, and by the way, it wasn't only women activists, but we also document the alliances that women activists made with other anti-militarization and human rights groups.
So all this effort and organization and speaking out, and even some who lost their lives speaking out, have you found that it's made any kind of a difference? And if so, what is the evidence of that difference that it's made?
I think one important triumph, which we also document in the book, has to do with the Sentencia de Campo Algodonero, the cotton field sentence. That was the mandate by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights that found this Mexico that found Mexico guilty of for the 3 femicides of 3 miners who were found in what was a former cotton field in the city of Ciudad Juárez.
So these were young women who were murdered in Juárez and left in a cotton field.
Right.
That
3
the
of 8.
Inter-American Court took
Right.
up.
And so the Human Rights Court found Mexico responsible for this femicide, and that sets a very important precedent. As a result of that sentence, there has been the creation of a whole legal framework that aims to prevent, that aims to eradicate, and that aims to put into motion a series of measures to that prevent repetition of these crimes.
There has also been some transnational cross-border solidarity developing. Not all of it constructive and positive, but some of it sensitive and taking direction from some of the creative and courageous leaders in Ciudad Juárez. So I see that as a sign of progress too.
Okay.
Challenges to U.S. policy, to U.S. drug policy, to U.S. gun policy that allows so many guns to cross the border.
So it seems like an ongoing work.
It is,
and,
ongoing.
And a lot of the people that you focus on in your book are continuing this work as we speak in Ciudad Juárez.
They are.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on to the show, Dr. Kathleen Staudt and Dr. Zulma Méndez.
Thank you.
This has been Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Mónica Ortiz Uribe.